Welcome to the Self-Belief Podcast, the show that we shift your self-belief in, because self-belief shifting shifts everything. It's something that I've noticed about myself, and I know that I'm not going to be the only one. I'll buy a book. I get excited about it. I'll start reading it even. And then I put it to one side. And I kind of hope that the information gets into my head by osmosis. But even when I do read a bit of it, I don't always take it in properly. I read the words, but they don't always stick. And I go back and think, did I read that bit? Now, if I listen to something, it goes in differently. But I still need the book as well, because I like to highlight the bits that stand out for me. So what I've noticed is, it's not just about the reading, and it's not just about the listening. It's about how you take it in, and what you actually then do with it. Inside my membership, I read things out loud, and people keep saying the same thing. Something just clicks. They hear it differently. They understand it differently, and they actually want to do something with it. So I created something around that with my book, and it's called the Just Being You, the Live Experiment. Small group, just 12 people, and every 2 weeks I read a chapter to you, and you hear how it was actually meant to be heard. Then 2 weeks later, we do the continued writing from that chapter together. So you're not just reading something and moving on, doing nothing about it. You're actually stopping, noticing what's coming up for you and doing something about it. There's no homework, there's no pressure, just a space to actually take in what the chapters of my book mean in the way that I meant you to hear it. £75 and there's only 12 spaces. So if you've got books on your shelf that you meant to read, or you've read things and nothing's changed, this is the bit that's been missing. The link's in the show notes. There's a moment that happens in a conversation, and it's really easy to miss. You've already said what you're going to do. You've made that decision, and then something shifts. Because someone questions you or looks unsure, and before you've really thought about it, you're already explaining yourself. It happened quickly, almost automatically. Welcome back to the Self-Belief Podcast. I'm Jenny Field, your self-belief expert from Just Being Me. And today, I want to talk to you about learning to pause before you explain yourself. This is the 4th episode in the series of 4, where we're looking at boundaries in everyday life. Not just the obvious ones, but the ones that are happening quietly in the background. By the time most people start thinking about boundaries, they usually already know something isn't working. They notice that certain conversations leave them feeling tense or drained. They replay things afterwards and wonder why they explain themselves so much. At the time, it often feels normal because it's something they've done for years. That was true for me. If someone questioned something I had said, my instinct was to explain it. If someone looked unsure about my decision, I would add more information. I believed that if I could help them to understand my reasoning, the situation would sort itself and everyone would feel comfortable again. And at the time, it felt reasonable. It felt like good communication. What I didn't recognise was the moment I started explaining myself, I was moving away from keeping the boundary I'd just set. It usually happened in conversations that they weren't dramatic. Someone might ask why I'd made a decision. They might look surprised or slightly disappointed. The reaction was often small, but my response arrived very quickly. Before I'd thought about it, I was explaining in the background. I would talk through the reasons why I'd made the decision and the circumstances around it. I wanted the other person to understand that I wasn't being difficult or unreasonable. The more uncomfortable the conversation felt, the more I explained. What I didn't see at the time was that the conversation had already changed. I'd started with a clear decision, but the moment I began to explain myself, the focus shifted. The conversation was no longer about the decision itself. It became about whether the other person felt satisfied with my explanation. And that was the pattern I'd learned growing up. If someone was unhappy, I believed I needed to fix it. If someone questioned me, I believed I needed to defend myself. If a situation felt tense, I believed I needed to smooth it over so that things would settle down again. Those reactions happened automatically. There was no moment where I stopped and asked myself whether explaining was actually necessary. The response was there before I'd even realised what was happening. The first real change for me came when I began noticing that moment. It happened in a conversation where I'd already said what I was going to do. The other person questioned it, and I felt the familiar urge to start explaining my reasons. My mind was already preparing the explanation, but this time I noticed it. I realised that I was about to go into the same pattern I had followed for years. I could feel the pressure to justify myself and the instinct to make the other person feel comfortable again. Instead of speaking straight away, I paused. It was only a small pause, but it gave me enough space to recognise what was happening. The decision I had made was still the same. Nothing about the situation had changed. The only thing that had appeared was somebody else's reaction. For the first time, I could see the difference between the two. There was the decision I'd made, and there was the pressure I felt to explain that decision so the other person would accept it. They're not the same thing. That moment helped me understand something important about boundaries. Saying no or stating a decision is only the first part of it. What happens afterwards often matters just as much. When someone questions you, the instinct to explain can feel very, very strong. It can feel like the polite or reasonable thing to do. But when explaining becomes automatic, it can slowly change the boundary you've just set. You start with a clear decision, but the conversation moves towards whether or not the other person agrees with it. Once I began noticing that pattern, I started slowing those moments down. Not every conversation needed an explanation. Sometimes the decision itself was enough. That didn't mean the other person always liked it. Sometimes people still asked questions or looked disappointed or argued the point. The difference was that I no longer felt responsible for making them feel comfortable about my decision. And that shift took time. For years, my instincts had been to explain myself so situations would settle down. Learning to pause before doing that meant I had to get used to conversations feeling slightly uncomfortable for a moment. But that pause changed something important. It meant the decision stayed the same instead of changing during the conversation. Once you start recognising those moments, you begin to see them everywhere. The moment where you are about to explain something that doesn't actually need explaining. The moment where you feel responsible for somebody else's reaction. The moment where you're about to adjust what you said so the other person feels better. The pause gives you the chance to see the situation clearly before the old pattern takes over. Understanding, that is where the next part of this work begins. Because once you can pause and see what's happening, you can start looking at something deeper. You can begin to ask which parts of a situation actually belong to you and which parts belong to someone else. And that is where boundaries become much clearer. If this is something you recognise in your own life, it's exactly the kind of pattern we explore when we work together. Learning to pause and understand what belongs to you can change how you experience conversations, relationships, and work. Thank you for being here with me today, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. If you'd like to know more, you can find all the links down below. Oh, and don't forget to press subscribe so you can catch the next one. See you soon.